Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach. And today we are talking about, as always, the biggest of stars and the deepest of sleepers, but a lot of deep sleepers today. A lot. Yes. This is a sleeper heavy show. If you are a sicko who is knee deep in the margins weeds, boy, do we have a show for you. But we got some real first round kind of caliber guys that we're going to talk about as well. So it's going to be a fun program. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing tonight?
Maxwell, I'm good, man. I've been taking advantage of the slow weekend to catch up on film. I told you before we recorded, I'm at over 150 prospects that I've been able to look out and take real detailed notes on. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Starting to get into the sicko territory now, where we can start getting real nasty with it, man. But yep. I'm good. How's your weekend been?
It's been good. It's been good. We had a bunch of snow here, so I took my daughter sledding for the first time the other day. She had a blast with that, so that was good. But yeah, it's all good over here. Any non-basketball related excitement for you at all before we get into that, or just same old?
Yeah, my wife got sick, so I've been
awesome.
bathing kids and cooking and cleaning and just I'm depositing more and more into the love bank.
Exactly.
I didn't complain about it at all, so that always goes a long way whenever you're just cheerful to do all of the things. So it's just been a day. I mean, normal husband dad stuff. So
for sure. All right, well, let's get to the hoops. Let's get to we want to talk about guys that we like over consensus. And let's get into it with Danny Wolf at Michigan. So Danny Wolf was a guy that I brought up when we came up with this topic, and then ESPN came out with their mock where they have him 21, and I think that's right actually around where I have him. So I did like him before more than consensus, before consensus had shifted a little bit, but I feel like I've also seen people kind of fleeing the Danny Wolf bandwagon a little bit. Yeah, and I'm not ready to do that. I really like Danny Wolf, so he was my name I brought. You've got two that we're going to get to later that we quite like as well. We're gonna kick it off with Danny Wolf though. I want to ask you first, because you, as we mentioned last week, you're kind of dropping into the middle of the season. When I did Danny Wolf for No Stone this summer, I was like, oh man, dribble, pass, shoot big, athleticism's a huge problem, he needs to get in shape, blah blah blah. When we organized that show on the bigs, for the podcast version of the No Stone series, I always ask you rank these guys by how interested you are in them, and you had Danny Wolf number one out of that group, which has now borne itself out. You were more confident in Danny Wolf than I was when I covered him as an under the radar prospect. So coming into the year and seeing Danny Wolf do this, how has that experience been for you? Going from he's the chubby dude from Yale to he runs 4 or 5 pick and roll at Michigan.
Man, good callback. I didn't even think to pat myself on the back over on that episode, so that's pretty good. He moves so much better this season at Michigan. So much better. It's been awesome to see. I didn't think that Michigan was going to be committed to a two big system. I was actually curious to see how they were going to stagger the minutes between the two bigs. And I guess they're just we'll play them next to each other, because Wolf as a dribble pass shoot big man, kind of makes sense as a big college 4-man. I mean, he makes hard cuts to the rim. He has sure hands, can dribble a little bit, solid shooting range. Obviously, when he is in the interior, he has soft touch in the paint. Good effort on the boards. He's very coordinated. He can try to be a little bit flashy sometimes, but I think he's experimenting with being a 4-man now, a role that he has probably never played in his existence, at least at a competitive level. He does some post and mid-post things that are really, really neat. He does struggle a little bit, I feel when he's up against like-sized big men. And in the conference that he plays in, he's going to be no stranger to some of these kind of rough and tumble fives within his conference. But his footwork kind of helps him overcome it. He's I don't know. I like him a lot. And I'm with you on consensus. I actually firmly have him within my first round as well. I just think that with what we're seeing now in college, I almost wonder if it kind of is covering up some issues that he might have with larger competition more consistently while being the defensive anchor. And that is where I think you probably do have some reservations, but ultimately, like, his weak side rotations are pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he could be maybe a system where you kind of have more athletic wings and forwards he could probably thrive in. But I'm also not going to count out the continued growth and development of the young man either to be able to hold down the 5 spot full time. It's just important, Maxwell, we talk about this all the time, that the NBA will run offense through their 5s. And I think Wolf fits that mold so well that teams are going to be willing to work with him on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's kind of where I'm at with it. The defense is still like very much a work in progress, but like, I think the defense is way better than it was a year ago.
Just
higher
better.
block rate this year, higher steal rate, moving so much better laterally. To the point where like he was a classic, like, what do you do with him on defense big to me, where it's like, well, if you put him in drop, he can't really jump. And if you make him switch, like, he's just kind of screwed. At the NBA, it's going to be another step from where it is right now. But I think like in college, he's moving well enough laterally that like, yeah, you can just like have him kind of switch onto guys and be okay a lot of the time. I still worry about that a little bit at the NBA level. Spirit in the chat asks, Daniel Wolf can dribble for big, but don't you think the handle's a little loose in the paint? Yeah, I do. I think the bigger issue with the playmaking is like what Steven mentioned, the like too much dip on his chip kind of stuff, where it's like, I'm throwing this pass cross court and it's going into the third row. Like, that is very much still a phenomenon with Danny Wolf. The turnover rate is sky high. Like 82, might as well be 82.
Whoa.
I'm just kidding. 28.2 turnover percentage this year, which is like astronomical. So like if I like run my data sheets of like bigs who've actually stuck around, like the highest turnover rates that I have for bigs, like Jericho Sims was at like 18.7. Jalen Duren was at 18.6. Granted, Danny Wolf's usage as a big man is also very high. Actually, no, it's really not. 23.3 isn't otherworldly. It's high, but it's not like it's a normal level of high for a prospect. He is really turnover prone. Where I'm still excited about Danny Wolf is I think everything is scaled up incredibly well. He's a pretty bad passer. See, I just don't agree with that at all. I think there are very few bigs who are capable of making the passes that he can make. Does he throw some inaccurate ones? 100% he does.
Yeah.
But I also don't know if you made other bigs run pick and roll. I think you would see a lot worse passing on a consistent basis out of almost every other big man in college basketball than Danny Wolf. I would not agree with that. I think he does get overambitious. I think the accuracy can be an issue. But I think by and large, he's still a good passer by big standards. The other thing I will say too, is he's actually cut his turnovers as the year has gone on. Do I still wish he turned it over less? Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. I do. Yeah. But if you look at the numbers, like through the first couple games, he was turning it over all the time. So during the month of November, 2.9 assists to 4.3 turnovers. Since then, 4.9 assists to 3.4 turnovers. So assists are going up, turnovers are going down. I think part of that is just familiarity, getting used to the system that he's in.
Level of competition too.
Yeah. I mean, and playing better teams and doing that.
Yeah. And I think too that like his role is completely different too. Like, I don't know how much he's used to having the offense flow through him in the way that it is. Like, it's much more perimeter based. It's much more looking for your teammates now instead of you being the advantage of the offense so close to the rim and being able to space the floor for your teammates. Now you're kind of seeing him. I think Metcalf brought this up the other day that he's almost in like a guard role for Michigan now. And that's not something that you just waltz into if you're not skilled enough for it. Or the fact too that like Michigan doesn't run offenses like this either historically. And I just think that
this isn't how Florida Atlantic played either. So this is Dusty May like getting into his bag too.
Exactly, right? So Coach May has done a fantastic job just finding ways to challenge both of the big men that they were able to bring in the transfer portal this year and finding creative ways to make best use of all the players on their team. And I think that's what has scouts and evaluators excited is you're seeing not only the competition scale up for Wolf now, But now you're seeing like the aptitude to learn a whole nother side of an offensive and defensive game that he's just never had to do. And he's like keeping his head above water while doing it.
Yeah. I think the other thing with Wolf that I've seen people bring up is the shot and if he's like a real shooter or not. The free throw percentage has like never actually been that good. But historically, like volume wise, the number of bigs who take as many threes as he does is pretty rare. Yeah. 5.5 threes per 100 possessions this year. That still puts him like relative to bigs that stick in the NBA, like top 80th percentile. Like that's not very common. And to be shooting 36% this year, really good number on that type of volume, particularly for a big man. Like that is really great. So I do buy the shot with him. I think that there are going to be teams where it doesn't work. Like I think there are teams that like, depending on the coach and what they're looking for and what kind of offense they're running, like it could be disastrous offensively. Like if they want to put up with those mistakes, certainly defensively, there's going to be troubles. I think he's going to be also be one of those guys where he's almost limited to who's on the court for the other team too. Where like certain games, it's going to be like if the other team is a 5-out team, he can play center against them. Other times he can really only play the 4 if it's going to be against another team that's playing a 2-big lineup. Like there are going to be real limitations because even with the athletic improvements that he's made, like you still don't want to put him at the 4 against Boston in a smaller lineup when he's got to like cover ground against like their funky delay actions and like get over a screen when a flare is being set for Jason Tatum. Like there's going to be stuff where it's just like, all right, we don't want Danny Wolf to have to guard this stuff. Those limitations are real. But I also just think the number of big men who are even capable of like dribble, pass, shoot stuff with his level of physical strength is exceedingly rare. It's exceedingly rare to have both of those in combination. I also do think that like fitness wise, there might be more to it. He's a weight loss guy. I'm a weight loss guy. I always believe in weight loss guys. Sometimes it doesn't pay off. The fact that he is showing this much athletic improvement when he's had to be in like a caloric deficit is really telling. Like when you kind of reach a stasis point where you're not losing weight anymore, you can make a lot of athletic strength, explosiveness kind of gains. So I'm intrigued to see with another off season what his fitness can get to and what his mobility and athleticism can get to. I think there's still some real concerns, but I ultimately just think like at a certain point you're betting on like outcomes, and I'm willing to miss on a guy who I think has a pretty rare set of traits, even if there are times where it gets like hideously ugly, both in terms of the passing decisions and the defense. I just ultimately think like not a lot of guys are this big and this capable.
I'm not necessarily worried about like the strength conditioning side of things. I think even though it's still college ball, right? Yeah. And you don't have as many 5-out systems, the fact that he's playing essentially a different position now, and again, keeping his head above water, I think is like that speaks to his development. And plus like just seeing how much he's moved this year, like I'm not going to count out the work ethic, right? Or the discipline to improve in his craft. I have a question for you though, Maxwell, because I'm curious if scouts and evaluators are going to kind of over-index to more craft-based big men as opposed to what we would probably consider like traditional big men, right? Like you're seeing how players like Zach Edey, Yves Missy are taking the court now, right? And are able to dominate within their specific roles. They are still skilled to a degree, right? Like, especially Edey. I think that his just development over the past several seasons probably under-discussed.
So cool, yeah.
Like, relative to his size, because people just look at him as like, hey, look at this, like, 10th wonder of the world or whatever, right? Like, I wonder if, like, with Quentin Post, players like that who are, like, becoming more skilled now in college basketball, I wonder if, like, there's going to be, like, a kind of swing back to the traditional, like, rugged, like Steven Adams types big man. You know what I mean?
I think we're entering like a really weird place with the center position where like, I don't want to say it's matchup oriented because that feels lazy, but it's like there are games where like just the bruising screener who like rolls to the rim hard as hell and like can dunk on people is such a mismatch for like the more nimble, lighter, skilled big, and then vice versa, where it's like those guys can also make the opposing player like really uncomfortable in space. I think from a team building standpoint, I kind of like the idea of like mixing it up and like having one of each, like just so that in the playoffs, like you can kind of have a counterpunch to throw at a team if they are getting after you with like their traditional big. Then you have your sort of run dunk guy who can still pass a little bit as opposed to like your 5-out big. Like I think it's going to be really important from a team building standpoint to make sure that you have those different options that you can throw at teams.
I
like
also
mentions like
too,
the Cavs, and like that's a great, like what the Cavs have is like really special. And I also think like it can't be understated. Like Evan Mobley is not the biggest dude in the world from like a meatiness standpoint, but I think the like level of toughness and assertiveness that he plays with on both ends of the floor is like a really understated part of his development, because it's not as like easy to point to or obvious talk, but it's like, oh, he's taking a couple more threes now, or like whatever. Like Mobley playing just like a much more like hard-nosed brand of basketball, I think has helped so much in terms of like the types of lineups that they're able to play and the advantages that he's able to create.
And I think, and I'm glad, you and our listeners have brought up a team like the Cavs. We could look at teams like Orlando or Utah, these other teams that are employing like a too big system. I think you can tell, like, if you look at a roster at who starts at like, say, the 4, I think that's like indicative to like their style of play.
Absolutely.
And I think that's indicative to like the state of the game too. And I would kind of throw this at you now, Maxwell. It's like, what do you think of Wolf's ability to kind of play a 4-man? Because you don't have to now just essentially play 1 guard, 3 perimeter players and a big man now. You can kind of go back to what we grew up with like in the 90s and early 2000s, where the 4 is like you're putting the power back in the power forward now.
Yeah, I think there's certainly lineups where that holds up better than others. Like against a team like the Cavs, like I think you can get away with it. If it's a team like the Grizzlies where they're running that like funky circle offense and you're having to like rotate all the time and make really complicated defensive decisions, I think it becomes a lot trickier to play against a team like that. So I think there's going to be nights where it works, and there's going to be nights where it works really well. And I even think against a team like the Bulls, which like I always feel like I was default to like the Bulls and Sixers because it's who I watch most often. But like the lineups where Pat Williams is at the 4, and Pat Williams is like a big bulky dude who's like not the fastest chased off the line, and he's not super assertive. Like that's still a lineup where you can kind of play Danny Wolf, because like they're not going to give Pat Williams the ball and have him like run a ball screen or really let him cook. Like the ball is going to be moving a lot on the Bulls. Like the Bulls have so many good passers, and like there's going to be times where like rotationally he gets put into tough spots. But that's not a guy who's going to like break him down. Like there are going to be matchups where there is a guy that even if they are more of a traditional wing, Danny Wolf can still sort of like guard with a level of comfort. So yeah, I think that's like a very real thing, which would not have been this summer when we talked about Danny Wolf. Like,
no, he didn't move. That lateral movement improvement is insane.
And like, and when I wrote about him for No Stone, I was like, kind of like, I don't think they're gonna play. I basically said without saying like, I don't think they will play him at the end of games. Like I was basically like, they're gonna default to Vlad because like Dusty May is comfortable with Vlad Golden, and Danny Wolf is a defensive liability. And like, I did not buy the 4-5 thing working out at all until like I got positive word out of a practice, and then like I think Raphael Barlow had a tweet. He had mentioned to me, I think it was like publicly on Twitter, that like, oh yeah, I talked to somebody who saw him and said he looks like a 1st-round pick. And I was like, whoa, okay. So took me by surprise, but I still really like the skill set. I think it's worth betting on. Let's move on to your guy, because this is a guy I really like too. Mackenzie Mgbako in Indiana. He is a 6'8" sophomore. One of those guys who like came into the year with a lot of buzz, and like it's weirdly kind of like plateaued to a degree. And I think part of that is just like Indiana's system and like some of the disappointing results they've had. But 12.8 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 1.5 assists to 1.6 turnovers, 0.4 steals, 0.5 blocks, just a hair under 38% from 3, just a hair under 85% from the free throw line, and good volume from deep. So classic 6'8" shooter, taking almost 10 attempts per 100 possessions. What do you like about Mackenzie Mgbako, and what do you think people are missing?
Well, I think the missing part, Maxwell, and we talked about this on the side, and I don't mean to get like all like news network on you.
No, I think it was a fair question.
Yeah, I just because you know how Corey and our listeners might catch this too is like Corey always says with like a Reed Shepherd type of basketball player that if like he had a undercut and like had a half sleeve tattoo, like people would just automatically think more highly of him because there's like an aesthetic or like a perception around him. I kind of think Mgbako is almost kind of inversed in a sense because he's like a well-built, like tall, like he looks like he should be a superstar player, but he's not like the most consistent on the defensive end. Yeah. But he is a really good rebounder, and he has grown so much as a playmaker. And when I say so much is because the floor was like really, really low, and he's like taking positive measures to like be a connective playmaker now. And if you look at his counting stats, like they're almost identical. But what's been great to see is that the efficiency has risen in terms of like finishing inside the arc, which was a major question mark about him coming in to college basketball, right? And then, you know, he was known as like the shooting prospect coming out of high school, and he didn't really shoot well. He shot I think like under 33% last year.
This year he didn't get going until conference play.
No, and like he's shooting almost 38%, like you just spoke on. I just think because it's a perception thing, because if you look at like the BART numbers between like him, Alex Caravan, and Liam McNeely, he's not really like that far off from those guys, with the exception of like the block numbers that Alex Caravan just like ridiculously like puts up. But everything else is like pretty in line. But Mgbako just doesn't get talked about as like being like a really good 3-point shooter. And it's crazy.
As I texted you, if his name were Mikola Mbakovic, would we be looking at Mackenzie Mgbako differently? I think there is definitely something to that, because there is like an aesthetic of like not super athletic shooter, and that's not what Mackenzie Mgbako, like they don't look like Mackenzie Mgbako, they look like Liam McNeely. So like, yes, I do think there is something to it for sure. Can
I run a
go for it. No, go for it, because you mentioned this when you were texting earlier. So
I wanted to reveal this to you. I'm super excited about it because I ran a BART query. Did you know, Maxwell, that Mackenzie Mgbako, and like, you know, just this is going to sound like a lot, but I feel like this is actually like really translatable for like a BART Torvik query for like the success of a player translating up, right? He's like the only credible draft prospect. It's like him and this other person that's like never, ever going to play in the NBA. But Mackenzie Mgbako is like the only real draft prospect with an 80-50-37 shooting split, with rebounding percentages of 5% on the offensive glass, 10% on the defensive glass, an assist percentage of at least 10%, and five dunks on the year. Like, to speak to like his improved finishing and like handling strength. Like, that's similar numbers and lines to Cam Johnson, Doug McDermott, Mikal Bridges, Dylan Windler, Ben McLemore, and John Lure. Like, almost all of those guys were first round draft picks too. You know, so I just think that when you look at him and you see the numbers and stuff, like this guy screams like NBA prospect. And it was one of those things that I've just noticed since I've been back, Maxwell, being airdropped into the season. This guy's like an early to mid second round draft pick on a lot of boards. And I'm just like, he is he's a real prospect, man. Like he should be discussed a lot more than he is.
I would agree. I think there's, I mean, anytime a guy's like 6'8" and could just like generally not make a bunch of mistakes and like knock down shots, like that's a good thing to be. I also think there's like some interesting low hanging fruit, where like he just like weirdly hasn't shot that well on like spot up threes this year. They have like,
but he shoots good off movement and screens and stuff.
Yes, and like they sort of like haven't used him in those play types as much, it feels like, this year. But he's also done a better job of cutting. The finishing is way better. He's finishing like 10% better at the rim this year. Just feels a little bit more assertive in general. Like the rebounding is like a little bit better. Like everything's just like a hair better than it was a year ago. And when we're talking about a player where like the role is just so crystal clear as far as like stay engaged on defense, be 6'8", and like shoot threes. Mgbako can do all of that. Yeah, I'm like right there with you. I had him like really high when he started out, super hot. He's cooled a little bit. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to like with him as a prospect. And I do think, to your point, like there is just like a degree of people missing it with him this year, which is a little odd. Especially since he sort of started out on radars. I don't think he's necessarily done anything to play himself off of radars. And also like the Indiana team construct is just like sort of a disaster this year. Like Kanan Carlisle is just like very clearly not what they thought he was going to be. There's been like the Umar Ballo like stuff with like him not being in the best shape. They'll randomly just like lose a game by a bunch of points. Like they don't have any other shooters. Like it's just real tricky. Like Luke Good, like playing the role that he is this year is like not something that you would have anticipated coming into the year, but that's what he has to do because nobody on this team shoots. And that makes Mgbako an easier cover. So yeah, I think he's really solid. Like, I just think this is a guy that like, whenever he decides his time comes, he decides to go pro, like there's always going to be a place for guys like this.
Yeah. I think too, that like the shooting, when we talk about guys more than just the 3-point shooter, like Indiana does things with him to where like he comes off of like these baseline screens and pin downs and stuff like that, to where he kind of comes up with like Rip Hamilton style, like mid-range pull-ups too. Mm-hmm. It's like really fun to see. I think he's very polished in that regard. He has some fun, like back to the basket, like mid-post game that he can kind of get to as well. The playmaking is inconsistent still, but it's much improved from where it was last year. And I'm just willing to bet on a guy like him growing like too connective. Like it's not asking a lot for a player to grow to like a more consistent, like just swing the ball, take 2 dribbles, make a read, hand it off to another perimeter player. Like you can simplify those things. And then if you look at the defense, like, and I'm going to be writing about him for this week too. So I'm kind of giving away some stuff for the article, but I got a lot more in my bag. The defense is actually, if you like do a Bartorvik query, which I know we all do because we love scouting and we like just kind of comparing players any which ways we can. I think that he is a much better defender than the numbers are giving him credit. But I do think that like the rotation stuff is there. The instincts are there. He's got like the size, frame, and length to where I do think that he can grow into like a really solid team defender. And the measurements are there. You know, we're talking about a guy who was a top 10 RSCI prospect, you know, whenever he came out. Like he was ranked ahead of guys like Jared McCain and who else? Jalen Wells, you know, within their class, right? So you're just looking at a guy who can really fill it up from outside. And I just think that his, like the conversation's been so muzzled when it comes to him.
Yeah, that has value at 6'8". Like end of the day, period, point blank. And I do think sometimes like we can, I hate using the word overthink it because like I don't really believe in that. But I think certain times we can overlook players where it is a little more simple, where it is just like he's tall, he makes decent enough decisions, and he can shoot. And like he's just playing a little bit more engaged defensively. Something else I just pulled up last year, only 1 dunk in the half court. This year he already has 4. Like that's the sort of assertiveness that I'm talking about. And like he has made, I think, some real like slight body improvements that just aren't super noticeable because it's not a huge part of his game. We're like with a guy like Danny Wolf, it's just like obvious. Like it's like he was chunky and now he's not. We're like with Mgbako, it's like most of what he's doing is like catching and shooting. So you don't really notice. Like, oh yeah, he is like getting downhill more. He's getting up off 1 foot more. He's holding up better against contact. Like it's just not as obvious. Another guy I thought about with him a lot after his freshman year was Moses Moody. Because the way that he's struggled as a finisher reminded me a lot of Moody. Like they had very similar like body posture against contact, and Moody's like filled out his frame really well. And Moody's going to be around the league for a long time. Like whether or not he's in a huge role or not, like there's always going to be a place for guys once they are a certain size and have enough like shooting and basic decision making. Let's get to Jahmyl Telfort, because he's a really interesting guy and he's someone that you really want to talk about. So I'm going to let you kind of cook on him. 6'7" grad out of Butler, 225 pounds.
Yep.
He is sort of having I don't know that I'd say like a breakout year, because he was good last year, but it seems like more people are starting to take notice of him. 15.5 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists to only 2.1 turnovers, 0.8 steals, 0.3 blocks, shooting splits of 43.7, 38.3, and 76.3. What are you seeing with Jahmyl Telfort that has you such a fan?
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of what we see with Mgbako, but Telfort actually has some juice with the ball in his hand, and that's what's really got me excited about him. He's going to be a little bit older, he's going to be 24 by the time he, steps onto an NBA court. So that immediately pretty much knocks you out of first round conversations,
Absolutely,
right? So,
yep.
Yeah, so I think Telfort is like a fringe second round. I have him in my top 60 just because I believe in the shot and the frame that much. He does have like a really pretty shooting motion, doesn't shy away from contact at all, maintains spatial awareness, kind of like that foosball concept that I always bring up, to where like the players are like on a string. Like once one player moves, the other one does. Like he does a really good job of spacing the floor. He does kind of have some like old man strength game to where he can put his butt into you and like use his back and his shoulders to like create separation, get into like a really trusty mid-range shot. Good enough handle to where you can trust him with like in an NBA concept. Gets his shot off the bounce. He's not like very stationary in his passing or shooting at all. He's got some runner floater game to him as well. So if he does get chased off the line, he's got a couple of moves that I think are going to scale up. Can put some pressure on the basket. Decent enough rebounder. I think the frame and like the other people that he has on his team, he plays so far away from the basket on the offensive end. And he typically does do like a good job of being a good point of attack defender at times as well. So he's commonly away from the basket. I think that he makes good passes on the interior, some fun high-low stuff, some fun back to the basket a la Vince Williams Jr. Takes really good care of the ball, plays solid defense with active hands, doesn't get moved out of position, and can do some switching. So I think that there are some things in his game, and like I'm nailing off a lot of positives, but his weaknesses aren't really like that bad. So I think he's like a safe floor prospect, which you kind of want with a player of his age. And I think that his game just translates up to the next level, like pretty seamlessly, So I think that Jahmyl is a guy who, being airdropped into the season, he's not a guy that you see like even a lot of second round conversations. But I just think like the measurements and the way that he plays, I think it all scales up really nicely.
Yeah, he's like just sort of steadily gotten better every single year. The thing I like the most about Jahmyl Telfort is how, like, if I'm taking a guy who's 24 or like acquiring them or like looking at getting him on an E10, even like I want to know that they're ready for the physicality of the NBA. And like he just is very strong and powerful and can get where he wants, and he's not going to get bumped off his line, and he can bump other guys off their line. Like there will be no adaptation period in terms of physicality, strength, toughness. That's all there. He's one of those guys where I feel like I want to be careful because it's like he sort of like walks a line between like eye test and spreadsheet that I have really hard time with, where like it feels like his fingerprints are all over the game when I watch the film. And then I look at the numbers and it's like, man, like the rebounding rates like aren't as good as I feel like they should be, because like he is securing position, but he's not really getting the rebounds. The assist stuff is really good. And like defensively, like no one scores on him, but he's not really disruptive. Like I'm just sort of perplexed by him to a degree. And I think the shot is like decent. Like the volume per 100 has always been solid. He's at 38.3% on the year. He needs to be a real shooter to stick at the next level, because like the other thing is just the role is so quirky where he does kind of get to be the lead initiator. And I love like the intellect and how well he processes the game. But I also think about a guy like Emmanuel Miller, who I enjoyed last year. And then like the draft came around and no team was ready to hand out the 2-way, and he had to work to get it mid-season from the Bulls. And I thought he was going to get one right away because I thought he's really smart and he knows how to move the ball and he's selfless and all this stuff. Yeah. And I feel like with Telfort, I don't think he's as good as Emmanuel Miller was. So I just worry, is a team going to like be super excited about him as a 24-year-old? My thing with Telfort is I just think because he's so strong and so smart, the one thing, and we're going to talk about this with some of these margin guys that we get to later, the one thing I thoroughly trust the G League for from a player development standpoint is you do just have to shoot a ton of threes there. So I like the idea of getting him as like a value play guy where maybe I get him on an E10 and I sneak him into my development program and I say, all right, what does this look like when instead of like going back to the basket on guys, it's just you launching threes all the time. And then when you draw a hard closeout, then you can punish it. And then we see like kind of how you're holding up defensively in that environment, whatever. Like, I think there might be something here. I don't know how immediate it is, which is always scary when a guy's 24, but he's also a guy that when you get to the E10 list, like I'm more interested in him than a lot of guys who are just sort of like generally not great at basketball that are going to be his same age. Like he's just so much more interesting to me than a lot of those dudes.
I think too that like there are a lot of bad teams in the NBA too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of really bad teams, and some of them might even be getting worse. And I think too that like what NBA teams do when they're bad is they go and get guys like Telfort because they're like, who can we trust to, like how you put it? I love the way you always phrase this, Maxwell. It's like, who can I trust to not get embarrassed on the court?
Yeah.
And I think like Telfort is like that guy to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why you don't see the 3-point numbers or the volume. You see the efficiency, but you won't see the volume to where he is like running the show, you know? Mm-hmm. And if you look at his off ball stuff, like it's there, you know, and it's been there consistently as well. And I think too, that like the frame does translate up. So Norin Rad asked in the chat, he said, what's a Telfort comp? Haven't really checked him out. I see a little bit of like Damari Carroll a little bit to his game.
Yeah.
You know, someone like that. I know that doesn't scream like, oh, hey, like take this guy. But like at his peak, Damari was like a really trusted guy. You know what I mean?
He's the other guy he reminds me of where like their athletic profile is different, but like he's kind of giving you a lot of the same stuff Najee Marshall gives you.
Okay.
Where it's like there's sort of this size, ball skills, maybe the shot's going in, maybe it's not, and like just sort of fundamental defense. Like I feel like that's sort of another guy that he reminds me of.
Yeah, I just think that, and again, when we're talking about like, I like him over consensus because he's not talked about at all. And I just think that like, if I'm taking picks in the second round, like I might bring this guy in. Like to me, he's top 60. I mean, when we talk about other players that are getting like second round love on big boards, I mean, I trust him over the likes of, you know, who do we got here? Alex Tui. I see.
Okay, I like Tui a lot. I
like Tui as well.
Yeah.
I like him, but I like him more than Tui, you know?
Interesting.
I see guys like Malik Lewis in there, Cedric Coward.
Yeah.
You know, like,
I love Coward. Lewis,
I love Coward.
Lewis, I'm fading on as much as I was into him last year.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that he's like comparable, like skill wise and stuff like that. So I would put him like in second round conversation.
For sure. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. After that, we're going to get to some of the guys in my article for this week about, funnily enough, interesting prospects on the margins, the guy that something that Telfort kind of fits into. So we're going to get to that. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right. So let's talk about some guys on the margins. This week, so like a year ago, I did a column that was like the most, what did I call it? It was like the most unique prospects with a shot at the NBA. I talked about like Javon Small, Tamin Lipsey, just kind of like a hodgepodge, it's like weird production guys.
Yeah.
A lot of them didn't pan out. Some of them did.
That was a pretty good one.
Yeah, Mgbako turned out. This year, I wanted to do it, just focus on like seniors that are on the margins and like just something that makes them interesting more so than unique. The first guy I want to talk about is Javon Small. Out of
love him.
He's a point guard, 6'2", stats on the year. Those are out of date. He's averaging just a hair under 20 a game. From standpoint, 19.4 points per game. 5.4 rebounds, 4.9 assists to 3.1 turnovers, 1.9 steals, 0.4 blocks. Shooting splits 43.6, 35.1, 88.2. I am like the small guard skeptic. I love Javon Small. So Here's my pitch about what makes Javon Small interesting. I think Javon Small is for everybody. I think if you are a spreadsheet dork, which like that's me, like I run spreadsheet stuff all the time. That's how like I find these guys and decide who's who I'm going to watch. Sky high BPM, 10.7, 6.1 offensive BPM, 4.6 defensive BPM. So like if you look at guys again that stick in the NBA, he grades out really well from overall BPM, offensive BPM, and defensive BPM. There is a holistic two-way impact that you are getting out of Javon Small from a spreadsheet standpoint that is quantifiable that you can point to. If you want to watch tape and be like, wow, that guy's nice. He does some really cool Javon Small does that. If you are an old head, and I'm a marriage of an illegal marriage of all three of these things because you're not allowed to do that. Believe me, banned, at least in the state that I live in. If you're like a guy who's just like, I want a dog, I want a guy that I feel like I can go to war with, Javon Small is that too. He is like a leader on the court who's diving for loose balls, competing with a high level of intensity. He has it all. Like Javon Small is for everybody. I don't care what approach you want to take to the game of basketball. You can't look at Javon Small and not tell me that like he's way more interesting than a lot of other guards that we talk about, especially on the smaller side. I love Javon Small. So that's my initial pitch on Javon Small. The nitty gritty of it is that he's like a really dynamic 3-point shooter. The volume is really high. He's good pulling up. You can't go under against him. He's 190 pounds, so he gets downhill really well. He's a good finisher through contact. He gets to the line a ton. Really high feel heads up passer who like has his head up all the time, like collapses those defense with his physicality and then picks them apart with his floor vision, and a really productive defender, like highest steal and block rates of his career, despite having the highest usage of his career, like never takes his foot off the gas. Really good mirroring the ball, holds up well physically, gets after it on the glass, knows what the other team is doing because he's a smart player. I'm like head over heels for Javon Small. And like longtime listeners will know, like I do not talk about point guards like this normally, especially ones that are in their fourth college season. Like I just think between the physicality, the mental, like combination of like mental processing and mental toughness with like how many upsets this guy has led a severely injury hampered West Virginia team to, and his ability to contribute on both sides of the ball, like I really don't understand like why we're not talking about Javon Small in the second round, but we'll talk about like scrawny freshman point guards that aren't nearly as good at basketball as him, that are like 3 years away from being able to like see the 175 pound mark on the scale. Like I don't get it. I will now go back for a moment after I've worked myself up, and now I'm not going to sleep because I got too passionate about Javon Small again. But what do you think about Javon Small?
I think you need a cigarette, Maxwell. That was good. See, I see him on the film, and I look at the spreadsheets, and I love all the intangibles that he brings. You know who he reminds me of?
Who?
Kyle Lowry.
Interesting. Yeah. I could see
He gives me some Kyle Lowry vibes. Quick first step. This is much younger Kyle Lowry. There are a lot of people who are probably watching and listening that are like, Kyle Lowry like isn't that good. Like go back and watch some like Memphis Grizzlies, Houston Rockets, Kyle Lowry. The guy was nice. Quick first step, pick and roll ball handler, makes good cuts, moves really well away from the ball too, which you got to go back and watch some of the when Tucker was not injured, because Tucker was nice with the ball in his hand. So you can rely on Javon to move well without the ball as well. Takes a lot of threes, but has a nice float and run game too. Very shifty, good, tight handle. Really can take advantage of defenders by putting them in jail on like the hostage dribbles and stuff like that. I literally have in my notes heads up playmaker. So like when you were on your soliloquy, I was so happy to hear that. Good court vision, and then defensively, just like active hands defending the pick and roll, like fights over the tops of screens, competes on the jumpers, like competes on drives, rotates over. Again, like that dog mentality that you spoke to. So I like him a lot. Like, and I have him within like that second round range, but like you, and why I have him and why I think you and I both have him so high is, my draft philosophy, especially like it's constantly evolving. But this year, I'm trying to get rid of like hypotheticals that I feel strongly that like players just won't reach, like especially at a certain level. I'm much more into like the physicality and like, can you play on an NBA floor today? You know what I mean? And like, we know that NBA teams are becoming more and more comfortable taking older prospects, maybe not in the first round, but like in the second round, you could be a 23, 24.
Too. Like, like I think to your point, like the CBA complicates that, where it's like, you cannot be wasting money or roster spots. So if I'm picking in the second round, am I going to take a 19-year-old point guard that I have to invest in for 3 years and hope that it pans out? Or do I just want to take the one that I know is good right now?
And Small's only going to be like 22 when he
he's younger compared to the other olds.
Like we were just talking about how Jahmyl Telfort's going to be like 24. Small's going to be 22, right?
Yeah.
And the way you bring up the money is so important too, because a lot of teams can't wait for the second contract for these guys to actualize their potential as well, because then how much are they going to be worth on the market? Then you get in a bidding war, and then you just spent a lot of time, effort, and energy into a player to develop them for another team to capitalize on, right? So I think that Javon fits so many boxes that you want from like these like sub 6'5" playmakers. And what gives me confidence is that you can trust him to play well away from the ball. It makes me mad that he wasted a year of development in Oklahoma State, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. It's wild that team had like him, Brandon Garrett, and Eric Daly, like 3 just really well-rounded, super smart players, and they were really bad. Like crazy to think about. But yeah, I think between like, I thought your point about the off-ball movement was great. And something I wrote about quite a bit in the article is there's so many guys that I watch where when they don't have the ball, they're just not interested in playing basketball. Like they sort of stand there, and Javon Small's the opposite. Like he's always moving, always relocating, like got that Energizer Bunny kind of thing to him.
Will set screens. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But like so calculated about it. It's the thing. Like he's just not one of these guys that's running around, just running around. Like he really knows how to play basketball. Man, I love Javon Small. So I think between like the ball screen manipulation, the table setting, ability to get downhill, polished pull-up game, and then like really knows how to play without the ball. I think offensively, there's so many things that you can do with him. You can play him alongside anybody. He will handle his business. And defensively, he's so much stronger and tougher than most other guards. So like you're cooking. So let's talk about Eric Dixon, who is like odd. Man, I really don't know what to do with Eric Dixon. He's like, Eric Dixon is a guy who started to pop up on mocks now because he scores all the time, everywhere. He is scoring 25.3 points per game. He has a usage rate of 34.5 and a true shooting percentage of 34.2. The only other person to have earlier in the week, he had a true shooting percentage over 65, and the only other person who did that on similar usage to him was Zach Edey. So like, but Eric Dixon is shooting threes is the thing. He's taking 13.4 threes per 100 possessions. A ton of threes. Like Sam Hauser volume threes, and making 47% of them is like a 6'8" guy who is as big as a house. Truly bizarre player, like interior post mismatch guy, knockdown shooter with absurd range who can set really physical, like bruising screens, solid decision maker, like okay passer, really slow, doesn't do anything on defense, but like as far as like playmaking, like he's not disruptive at all.
Yeah.
But like shockingly good at just like staying in a defensive stance and not crossing his feet. And like, you can't really shake him, but he's 265 pounds. You don't really get through him. Odd player. I am like, you could tell me Eric Dixon like gets to NBA training camp and they're just like, this is a disaster. You could also tell me that he's this year's Jamison Battle, where like we're a couple months in the season, it's like, oh yeah, that guy just like plays in every game for his team because he is big and shoots threes. Like I lean more that way. Like I lean more into just like a team is going to draft Eric Dixon because he's huge and can shoot. So really weird player. I think ultimately you just kind of bet at a certain point on like, I know he can put the ball in the basket.
I was with you on Javon Small. Like, I see Eric Dixon, and it is like quite a conundrum that he puts evaluators in, right? Because like this, like how you mentioned earlier, like the stat sheet people gotta love him. I mean, like it's on Bartorvik, like he's just green, like green. Like, I just think that he's going to be like the epitome of like a really good college basketball player.
Yeah.
But because you want unique, right? Because typically like the best players in the NBA are unique, right? But I just think that Eric Dixon, he's a grad student, so he's old. You know?
And there's a lot of unique players in the G League too.
There are.
Let's be real. Yeah.
Like, who's the cat that only shot hook shots? You know?
Oh, I mean? Xavier Simpson.
Xavier Simpson.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But I don't know, man. Like, he doesn't move well defensively. He's very below the basket. Like, as a defender,
I don't think
like
he
not
has
even
a dunk. Like, I don't think he's dunked this season.
It's like he doesn't really get vertical. Like, he gets vertical, but he doesn't like come off the floor. And he's only 6'8", and like I don't buy the reach being anything massive either. You know, he's
he measured at Portsmouth last year, and it was like a 6'11" wingspan. Like he's
like a +3,
65 pounds. Yeah, with like power forward like wingspan and standing reach.
Yeah, and like as good as he is offensively, like you don't want him to dribble.
No. That's the other thing too, is like if you're putting him at the 4, there's like I'm like a real firm believer in like if he's a 4, there's a huge skill deficit thing. Yeah. Like Eric Dixon is a 4. Like he's not attacking a closeout. Like he's basically just a stationary shooter, which can be an okay thing if you are just like on the court during the regular season. But like Norton Rad asked like JT Toppin or Eric Dixon. To me, it's like JT Toppin 100 times out of 100, because JT is also going to give you like weird, bizarre regular season production, just like through his rebounding and his defensive disruption and like whatever else. We're like, and like even if you're like not sold on the shot with JT, it's like, well, if that's like the only thing that you really need to work on with him, because I'm like more of a believer in like JT Toppin's like ball skills and passing and stuff than I think a lot of people are. And JT's also just like a winner at every level is the other thing with him too. Yes. He's never been bad.
I just look at like other players like on my board real quick too, like Momcilovic. Like I would rather bet on him playing that same position. Baba Miller, I would rather bet on him defensively, like being.
That's the thing too, is like a lot of these guys. It's like, do you think Eric Dixon ever like plays minutes in a playoff game?
Probably not. Like he's going to get cooked.
And that's the thing too, is like I feel like there's a much better chance of that with JT Toppin, with Milan Momcilovic.
Josh Jefferson, I buy.
Like, yes, yeah. It's like I'd rather take like Josh Jefferson, where there is a chance of like maybe Joshua Jefferson never shoots and I wasted a pick, but also like if Joshua Jefferson becomes like an okay standstill 3-point shooter, I have the smartest defensive player and a great passer on the floor. Like it's 6'8". Like I'd rather miss on Josh Jefferson than hit on like what I think the Eric Dixon best case scenario is in some cases. But depending on like who stays in the draft and who withdraws, like I think there's a real possibility to get to the second round. You just swing on Eric Dixon.
You could, right? Like to me, he is like an archetype that could have existed in like late 90s, early 2000s, where you had like, you know, Matt Bonner, you know, Jason Bono, you know what I'm like, you had like people who you just put in a corner and they shot, you know, and they played for like 7 minutes a game.
Mm-hmm. But if you're a team like, okay, let's say Boston has a second round pick, like late second round, and you know that you can like insulate him with another rim protector at all times because you could like play him with Porzingis. And it's like, we just need a guy who's going to go out and hit threes during a regular season game to fill a roster spot. And like, we don't even have the intention of playing him in the playoffs. This is just like, Luke Cornett is hurt and Jordan Walsh is hurt. And when it's garbage minutes time, we need a guy to stand there and shoot threes. Like, then it's like, maybe you just like are like, fine, we'll take Eric Dixon. Like, I think there are situations where like he can give you something cheap that maybe makes sense. If you're worried about financial ramifications, I realize this is like the least sexy pitch ever.
Yeah. Like give me Matt Cross, give me
sure.
Matthew Cleveland.
I'm not a Matthew Cleveland guy.
I'm not either, but I have him over Eric Dixon. Like, there's
fair.
so many other Trevon Brazil. Like,
sure, yeah.
I would probably bet on Brazil. You know?
I think it's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a weird guy, and like I'm also intrigued to see what he would look like. Because I think he's for sure getting at least an elite camp invite at this point. Like I'm really interested to see what he would look like in the scrimmages, because like there's always guys where it's like, man, I bought this and this about a player, and then you see him on a court with everyone else who can do this stuff, and it just doesn't work. And then sometimes it really does work. Like Mgbako last year was like the weird one, where like in the WCC conference games, he just was not very good when he had to play like real bigs. And then you put him in the combine. It's like, oh, weirdly, he's like better than everybody. Like, okay, all right. Like that actually works on this type of court. And like Dixon's a guy I'd be fascinated to see whether it goes that way or it's just like, this doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, he does like, I'm sitting here saying that like he can't do anything on a basketball. Like he is shooting the cover off of the ball at like ridiculous volume, and like at his size,
smothered, like getting just open looks. Like it doesn't matter that he can't move into a shot; he just shoots them anyway, and they go in.
Yeah, I mean, trailing 3-point shooter, pick and pop big man for a couple sets. Like there are ways that like he could probably be like beneficial. I just worry so much about like how he plays defense in the NBA, like at all.
Yeah. We're going to have the opposite conversation sort of in just a second. So stick with us. And on the other side of the break, we are talking Dylan Cardwell. We are talking Steve Settle III. We are talking Cameron Matthews, all your favorite players, all the stars of the year. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, let's do Dylan Cardwell. Dylan Cardwell is like the guy in this next group that I'm like weirdly sort of in on. So Dylan Cardwell is a center at Auburn who came off the bench for the last 4 years. Now he starts alongside Jahmyl Broome. Dylan Cardwell is like an elite finisher, like for his career over 70% from the field. He is enormous. He's 6'11", 250. He flies off the floor. Like he jumps out of the gym despite having enormous physical dimensions. He sets great screens. He protects the rim. He blocks a ton of shots. Like per 40, 3.5 blocks per game throughout his college career. So we've got NBA size. We've got NBA finishing. We've got NBA rim protection. And he has a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio this year. And that's not anything different. He can like legitimately run offense from the top of the key. He's a really great passer. He's really good at spray outs after he grabs an offensive rebound. Another strength of his, offensive rebounding. So why is this man with these great physical dimensions and athletic traits and ball skills on the margins? He scores 5.5 points per game. He shoots 28% at the free throw line. That's not ideal. Like teams are just generally not looking to draft a guy who scores under 6 points per game, especially when they're like 23 years old, especially when they are a complete liability at the free throw line. He also fouls a lot is the other thing.
Yeah.
Like career 8.3 fouls per 100 possessions. So there's a firm cap. All right. Like we've got a guy, he's older, fouls a lot. When he gets fouled, ain't no way he's making 2 free throws.
Pretty young for a grad though. You know?
Yeah. I ultimately just come back to like, if I have to play a garbage man center, give me a dude who is NBA size. Give me a guy who will do the garbage man stuff. Give me a guy who can guard multiple ball screen coverages and a guy I can trust. And there aren't a lot of those. And I think that's Dylan Cardwell. I think Dylan Cardwell is like a guy that you can just like have on an NBA roster.
I don't think that that's out of the question. I think that he could be like a 5-6 year, like in a rotation, like Festus Ezeli style big man. You know what I mean? Like someone like on a team who had like Phoenix, for example, right? Like 3-star model, crazy expensive team. Like, you know, maybe improves like their scouting, like what we always give like the Toronto Raptors or Miami Heat for historically, like going in off the scrap heap and just bringing guys in to play a few minutes a game. Like, I don't think that this is crazy. I mean, he is big and strong. You touched on the offensive rebound. I think that he makes nice moves away from the basket too, like in a too big system on a college floor. Like it's really hard to give a credit for a man of his dimensions for how well he moves away without the ball. like a very good lob threat, gives good screens, won't shoot, not much touch outside of, an arm's length away from the basket. Finds with contacts. I put that he sees open teammates, very nice kick out passer, doesn't force bad looks either. So like, even though like he does have a tendency to behave like very goofy on the basketball court, he doesn't do like your JaVale McGee like crazy passes or your Andre Drummond like Magic Johnson impersonations or anything like that. Right? I think that he'll work fine as a DHO big man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like put him on the elbow, let him be a physical wall for people to run away from, and he can dive to the basket and convert.
That's the thing. You get two on the
lobs.
ball. Like, what a great lob target.
Exactly. You just don't want him really doing anything other than traditional big man things, which again does serve a purpose in today's NBA. I don't have him like in a draftable shot like right now, but
I would be stunned if he gets drafted.
Yeah, like he's a good E10 two-way
That's
candidate.
What I'm saying.
Like he's fine.
Yes, I'd be hesitant to give him the two-way right away just because I don't know that like another team would. But I would like the second the draft ends, I am calling that agent being like, please, 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 E10 with us. Like if the two, like we are going to keep a two-way spot open for him to compete for, and like we're totally open to giving that to him. I think there's a non-zero chance like he just earns one, or like an analytically inclined team just gives him one, just because like this stuff has real value. Like I will probably have him in the two-way range on my board. And like, I don't think that's going to be the norm because he's a guy who scores under 6 points per game, but I sort of buy it.
He's on a stacked team too. Like how many, like how many more points are available to him?
If you put him on like
South Carolina,
Northwestern, like a good, like Northwestern's like a good team, but like if you put him on Northwestern where their big men are a little bit more plotting, and then like you just have other guys that can sort of feed him the ball, but outside of like the Leach, Barnhizer, Martinelli trio, there's just like not a guy that scores a ton. Then he's probably averaging like 12 a game.
Yeah, like definitely like that 8 to 12. Because again, like Janai Broom is eating a lot of points. Chad is eating
Jahad Pettiford.
I like some Pettiford now. Like I'm in a dangerous spot with Pettiford. But yeah. I like Cardwell, man. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah. Let's do Steve Settle III at Temple, a guy who I did for No Stone like 2 years ago. And then this year I did a column where I was like ranking all the guys from past No Stones. And I was like, probably not going to happen for Steve Settle. And then I think it might actually happen for Steve Settle.
He looks good.
Yeah. 11.1 points per game, 6.8 rebounds per game, 1.9 assists to 0.9 turnovers, 1.3 blocks, 0.9 steals. So almost like a steal and block per game, which you always like to see. He is 6'10". And he is shooting just a hair under 40% from three. So what we're dealing with Steve Settle, let's get the negative stuff out of the way. He's going to be 24 soon. Still really skinny. And just like statistically, like not a great like career BPM. Like you're more banking on like the player that he's developed into now than the player he's been in the past, and thinking you can build off that. Because like every couple of years, like I would say every year there's like one guy who does like a little better than you think, and like they can at least play in the league like some nights and be fine. And then like you get your Gabe Vincent's where it's just like, hey, the development just happened like later, and they sort of overcame that. I think Steve Settle is like a guy that NBA teams are going to have a good amount of interest in, just because he's 6'10". He is like a really interesting 3-point shooter. So the career mark is 32.5.
Yeah.
I've always thought he's sort of like underachieved from behind the arc. Like the shot, it looks a little bit funky, but this year
it's janky. In my notes, I put it's a janky shot. Yeah,
it has a weird hitch at the top, but he's doing like shot maker stuff this year. Like they are having him, like his two most common 3-point types are spot ups and pick and rolls, where it's like he comes off a ball screen and he uses like this weird little step back to generate space for himself and he knocks it down. And then defensively, he's super disruptive because he's a really smart player. Like career steal rate 2.4, career block rate 3.4, like just knows how to get places, covers ground well, really good laterally. I think there was a game his junior year, I want to say, where they played like either Kansas or Kentucky back when he was at Howard, and he guarded like everybody at different points and like held up really well against everyone, even though he is super thin. I just think when you look at like what the role is generally going to be at the next level. Oh, and really high free throw rate this year too. Like totally willing to take contact downhill. When you look at like what an NBA team is generally asking a guy to do that is on the margins, it's like, please play defense, be long, and just shoot threes when you're open and don't turn the ball over. Steve Settle's doing all of that this year, and he's 6'10". So like I just think like Steve Settle's like a real NBA prospect just based on that. It's a little reductive. It's a little bit simple and straightforward, but sometimes that's what works. And I think his dimensions make him particularly interesting and unique.
Yeah, I mean the fact that he's 6'10" is a sell. Like he moves really good on the floor. Can get to his shot off the bounce. The shooting base, like you mentioned the hitch on the top, but the base is like pretty like oddly narrow too. It does have a handle. It can get away from him at times, but like again, if you put him on the floor, he's going to be one of these guys that's like 2 dribbles and make a decision, and I think that he can do that, right? Puts pressure on the rim. The shot does have a very nice high arc to it as well. He does have some fun mid-post stuff to his game. You just can't leave him open. You know, he does get to the paint a lot, doesn't care about contact, but it does affect like his finishing inside, which is a little bit of concern.
Sure.
Really good first step, can swing the ball, uses the threat of his jumper to create passing lanes for others. I like him better as like a stationary playmaker, like a guy who can like pick up the ball and like just find an open teammate. He is active on defense and he does move well and has like kind of like weird quickness for like someone his like frame to just kind of like burst and go and make a home run play. And I do like his recovery tools, but he also doesn't have to really worry about like getting screened at the college level like a lot too. Like if you look at like his defensive film, like there's not a lot of big to big or like guard to big like screens happening at against the level of competition that like Temple is playing. So I do think that it's like what's not in the film that could also worry me a little bit right now. But a guy who's 6'10" and move like, more importantly, like he's not like a praying mantis. You know what I mean? Like he's good with the ball in his hand. He can move the way that he does. There's like some really positive defensive film. Again, a guy that I would like definitely bring in to see what he can do like in training camp, just to kind of see what's there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Last one is the guy that we sort of bonded over. And I think he started like pop up more. Like I see the name more and more. Cameron Matthews at Mississippi State. Sort of a bizarro guy that I've always wanted to break out, and it just like hasn't really happened. But I think someone's going to bite on an E10. He is also a graduate prospect. Offensively, like odd player, 8.7 points per game, 7.1 rebounds per game, 4.0 assists to 2.1 turnovers at 6'7", 235 pounds, averaging 2.8 steals per game and 0.8 blocks per game. Cameron Matthews is a nightmare on defense. Like he put the clamps on Colin Murray Boyles recently, which like I think that's like kind of when people took notice of him, and that's like what was the tipping point for me making him one of the guys I wrote about in this article. But yeah, really high stock numbers, really good on the ball, like just has the feet to contain people, physically overwhelming with his strength, obscene hand-eye coordination to like make plays literally like on the ball, like whether that's like pinpointing for a block or getting into a handle. He loves to like rotate over and get in low on the ball and just like knock it out of guys' hands before they go up, which is like he makes that play all the time where he'll be the low man defensively. A team will like have like a big man rolling to the basket. They'll hit the pocket past the big and he'll rotate over and just like swat the ball out of the guy's hands before he can even leave the floor with it. Love that about him. Pretty skilled with the ball, like can dribble enough to run some like DHO stuff. Really good passing vision, can make some really sharp whips. A little turnover prone as well, like another high turnover rate guy. But again, can also sort of power his way to spots on offense, like has that grab and go game because of his rebounding. Strong finisher inside. Never been a shooter. And that's the thing. Like throughout his college career of 5 years, he has taken, the other day, it wasn't even 100 total threes. When I looked, he is at, now he's at 101 total threes for his college career, and he's only made 21 of them.
Yeah.
Poor free throw shooter, career 56.7% from the free throw line. I wonder with like Mgbako being a guy that gets minutes this year, and like, look, like everyone like forever was like, is this the guy the next Draymond Green? And like maybe this guy can be Draymond Light, and like it just never worked. But Mgbako being like 4th in VORP and 8th in BPM among rookies just makes you wonder, like, are teams like figuring out how to play like these kind of guys if they have like the requisite ball skills? And I don't think he's like as slippery or as bouncy as Mgbako. And he doesn't have like that late bloomer trajectory either, but there are just so few guys that match his overall production in terms of like DBPM, steal rate, block rate, like physical size. Like, I get that he can't shoot at all. I get it.
Yes.
I wonder if it's just like, we either try to figure out a way that we can play him, or like, again, like I said, the one thing the G League is good for is like making guys bomb threes. I think the fear with that is like, I heard last year I talked to somebody in the league about like a similar prospect, and they sort of like derogatorily use this term, like, I worry he's a G League 5. We're like, because the G League is so small, teams will just take a guy like that and play him at the 5.
Yeah.
I worry about like that kind of happening and like him falling into that trap. But I'm also just like, I would really like to roll the dice on a guy who is so good defensively and has a level of passing feel, and just see if we can figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, there are players in the NBA who still can't shoot threes that get playing time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I like him. I text you like when I watched him, like, this dude is just like a hoss. Like, that was the first thing in my notes. First thing I told you was like, this dude is just huge, right? Doesn't shy away from contact. Does have a little bit of a handle. Good finishing numbers, although he doesn't have a lot of wiggle to go with the dribble.
Sure.
Doesn't shoot, but some decent floater touch. Like, if you're going to point to anything that's like, maybe there's something there, that would be like really the only life draft that you could grab onto, right? Bullies his way to the rim, good athlete, not a high level passer in terms of like complexity, but like makes good reads. Shot travels a long way before it's released is another thing, but those are really like the only concerns that you have with him offensively, even though it is like a big portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
But high energy, crashes the glass, makes good decisions, can hit. Like, he makes some very good high level rotations too, that like, there are plays that he should have no business being in, and he just ends up being within them. Gets up and makes emphatic rejections. You know, you talked about how he can just like rip the ball away. This dude can like get up and swat the heck out of some shots as well too, right? Like, great link to contest jumpers. Like, he blocks jump shots too. Like, that's like a really difficult thing to do, and he does it pretty consistently. And obviously at the rim as well. Quick hands for strip steals and gets vertical easily. Like, there are several things to really like about him on that side of the ball, and I think that's going to be his like meal ticket to getting any sort of NBA minutes. And maybe you do get away with him being like kind of this like wrecking ball, like defensive Tasmanian devil on a team that does have like another floor spacing big or something like that, to where maybe he just gets in and is like this like weapon X of a 4 and just like gets minutes due to hustle, because like coaches do like players that have like that high level of energy as well.
Yeah, I'm just really interested in him. Like, I think if it doesn't work, it will not be a surprise why. But again, like, I feel like I say it all the time, like, at a certain point, like, there are not perfect prospects anymore, and you have to swing on guys that have some real faults, and he's the kind of guy that I would be interested in just kicking the tires on and seeing what I can get out of it. But yeah, that does it for this week's episode here. Steven, what have you got cooking, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on X at Steven G Hoops, and now I made a Blue Sky. So
there we go.
Yeah, so Steven G Hoops on there, .social, well, like whatever the rest of it is on there, but look up just Steven G Hoops or Steven Gillespie, and you'll find me on the Blue Sky now. Yeah, and I'm working on a Mackenzie Mgbako article, and I'm gonna put some other prospects that I'm watching as just kind of like, you know, maybe like Steven sleepers or something like that. Maxwell, you and I talked about a good number of prospects that I found. A lot of them have like real juice, and I can't wait to write on those as well, man. How about you? What do you got in the works?
Yeah, so I've got my article tomorrow where I talk about a lot of these guys we just talked about in sort of more depth and a little bit more granular detail statistically. on the guys we talked about today, just because it's boring on a podcast. We'd be like, the rebound rate is 1.4.
Yes.
No, like I don't want to do that. But yeah, go check out my article on that. Don't quite know what I'm doing next week. Hopefully got some cool like interview stuff coming. Should have a No Things Plus article this week. I'm going to the Northwestern Maryland game this week, so really excited about that.
Barnheiser Hive stand up.
Barnheiser Hive stand up. Don't forget that Javon Small is for everybody. You can find me.
That would be a great article title, by the way.
Oh, he's Javon so great.
Small is for everybody. Yeah.
So yeah, follow me at Boundboards on Blue Sky, on X, the everything app. Yeah, that's where I am. No Ceilings NBA. Subscribe, like the podcast wherever you're listening. Yeah, do all that stuff, and we will see you all next week. We'll be right back here then. Have a great night, everybody.
Much love, y'all.